भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो मुरली गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, माई मीरा के नाथ प्रभु गाइए रे। गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल प्रभु गाइए रे।
गिरधारी गिरधारी गाइए रे, भजो नंदा के लाल प्रभु गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
मुरली मनोहर गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
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 गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
गोविंद गोविंद गाइए रे, भजो राधे गोपाल कृष्ण गाइए रे।
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 Welcome to Satsang. Such a beautiful way to celebrate the shift in the day from the outer external day of work or day of engagement into the time of the evening and night, to have this sacred time of diving deep together into the truth of ourselves. So it's such a a beautiful joy and a beautiful gift to drop into this space together. Any questions that you have, feel free to put them in the comments box. Unfortunately, Facebook doesn't have the functionality that Instagram does of actually being able to bring you live onto the screen so that we can look at each other. But if you put your questions in the comments box, then our beautiful Seva team will be able to get them and read them to me.
I understand the ego isn't separate from us, but it is a function of the mind that's identifying with the stimuli and actions of the body, because we forgot we're more than that. So, is the ego like not being able to see the trees for the forest? We're so focused on this one tree, all the details of it, and what's happening to it, that we forget that there's an infinite forest.
The ego is the way that we understand ourselves. So it's not so much the tree for the forest as it is the tree or the forest for existence. The tree or the forest for creation. The ego functions in this false identification. It's not about big or small. It's not about important or unimportant. The ego is the same that would say to you, you are this little tree, as that would say to you, you are it all. It's all ego. The ego is the one that says you are the best, and the ego is the one that says you are the worst. Anything that is separating you from being at one with all, anything that is separating you in time, in space, in experience, is ego. Now, it's important to understand it's not about good or bad. The ego is not something that's just as simple as to say, oh, the ego is bad, be done with it. The ego is that actually as we grow is of great importance. It's the ego that helps us when we're young kind of figure out, okay, am I, do I want to hang out with the athletes, or do I want to hang out with the brainy kids, or do I hang out with the rebels? Or, the ego is the one that tries to kind of figure out who we are. The ego is the one on a positive level that makes us understand you can't steal the cookies off of someone else's plate. That's his. That's the ego. The ego says, this is your plate of cookies, that's his plate of cookies, you are separate. No, you can't eat the cookies off his plate. So the ego is created in us for a function. It helps us as we grow kind of understand where I end and the rest of the world begins. Because there's also an inherent responsibility in that. There's a responsibility of knowing, for example, that I'm not entitled to the cookies on your plate. In terms of running effective, peaceful societies, it's actually very good to have people acculturated in that sense of ego. The dilemma comes when we lose sight of the fact that this is only very temporary. This is only one channel. Another way of thinking about it is channels on a radio or a TV. You know, if you go back to the days where we had dials and you could adjust a radio station or adjust a TV station. The TV is broadcasting all of these channels simultaneously. The radio station is giving it all to you simultaneously. We get to decide which channel we're watching, which channel we're listening to. And of course, they're going to give us different experiences. You know the difference in the way that you feel, even down to a cellular level. Listening to beautiful classical music from listening to, say, a football game, or listening to the news about, say, an election. You know the way that you feel inside differently. It's not just how you think. It's actually how you feel. And when we think about being here in human form, here in the body, here as this particular story, well, the ego is wrapped up with this particular incarnation, this particular story. It's one channel that says, I am 49-year-old female American sannyasi living in India, spiritual teacher, humanitarian disciple. That's actually ego. Because it's saying, I am that which I've experienced. I am that which I do. I am the color of my skin, the country I was born in. I am my thoughts. Truth is, that's just one channel. It's what we're going to call the human channel. And the human package comes with in the package, is ego. Because the ego is that which defines us. When you say, I'm a compassionate being, that's ego. Not in a bad way. And that's why it's so important for us to get away from these labels of good or bad. The ego is basically, I am, followed by pretty much anything. Anything other than consciousness, pure awareness, soul, divinity. Anything else that you fill in the blank after I am with is ego. And whether it's something that says a victim of this, a victim of that, the best at this, the worst at that, or whether it's something more helpful on our spiritual path, like, I'm a compassionate being. I am on a spiritual path. I am opening and unfolding into the truth of who I am. That's beautiful. It's also ego. Why? Because the ego functions in separation. How are you separate from, different from everything else? The individuality that is you, that is ego. So the simple awareness that I am on a spiritual path, I'm one of those. Spiritual being, one of those. A meditator, one of those. That's ego. It's just another way of identifying myself. Now again, it's worth repeating. This isn't bad. It's actually good. Because the mind spends so much of its time on that channel of ego that as long as we can give it something like, I am a compassionate being, a spiritual being, a being of love. I am a meditator. I am someone who chooses love, chooses peace. Well, what that means is that the more I identify as that, the more I'm going to act like that, the more I'm going to choose like that, the more that will actually become my identity and therefore my experience. So it's actually very helpful in some ways. But then you have the opportunity to change the channel. And when you change the channel, it all just dissipates. Because then it's not I am blank. It's just I am. I am. I am. And that is when we break free from the ego. The awareness, I am. So don't think in terms of trees or forest. Think in terms of anything that has a border around it, a defining line around it, and that which doesn't.
Is I'm not the doer, like stepping back and observing the ebb and flow of emotions that are happening and the responses of the body to those emotions? Can you feel it happening, but it doesn't affect you because you're not attached to it? You're not controlling anything, and it's just happening.
So there's two pieces here. Let's take the part of watching the emotions first, and then we'll come back to I'm not the doer. Watching the ebb and flow of emotions is one of the most powerful spiritual practices. It's also a great emotional, psychological practice because emotions are waves. So the ebb and flow is a great term, like there's an ebb and a flow in the waves of the ocean. There's an ebb and a flow in our emotions, both that which we label good and that which we label bad. So joy ebbs and flows. Anger ebbs and flows. Satisfaction ebbs and flows. Dissatisfaction ebbs and flows. And there's a lot of practices, which I won't weave into this question, but we'll talk about another time, and we speak about it frequently, in terms of how to make those we label positive emotions, the joy, the satisfaction, how to make that last longer. And those that are the anger, the dissatisfaction, how to shorten the duration of that. But for now, all of what we're feeling, it comes in, it peaks, it dissipates. Or it comes in, it's coming in, and then something else happens and it goes out. So happiness is there, joy is there, satisfaction is there, and then something I wanted to happen didn't happen. Or something I didn't want to happen happened. And it takes that wave of joy and it pushes it out to sea. And it brings in instead a wave of anger and frustration, maybe despair, maybe vengeance. And that peaks. And then eventually that goes back out to sea. The dilemma comes when we try to hold on to the positive ones and push away the negative ones, because then we end up living on the surface of the waves. It's like we're surfers, loving the downs but hating the ups. It's just the opposite of it. We love the ups but hate the downs. But in either case, you're living on the surface of the ocean. You can only surf the waves right on the surface. And you can only surf when there's waves that are really, really high, otherwise with the maza nahi aata. In the same way, the more attached we are to our emotions, the more we have to be living on the surface. And so every time that you say, oh yeah, I love this joy, I love this happiness, I love this satisfaction, this is great, I love this excitement, I love this success, I love this pleasure. Every time you say that, you've hooked yourself into a wave that's going up, which means that you're still hooked into it when something happens and it then goes down. And this is where in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna speaks so beautifully about the yogi, the wise one, as one who is the same, that embodiment of equanimity in pleasure and pain. Not the lover of pleasure and the hater of pain, but one who is in a state of equanimity in both pleasure and pain, in both joy and sorrow, in both success and failure. So being able to watch the emotions is a great, great ability, step, practice tool, because it pulls us out of the waves. If I'm sitting on the beach or sitting on a cliff watching the waves, I'm not getting tossed around by them. And so what meditation does, what spiritual practice does, is it takes us out of the ocean of being thrown around by the waves and gives us this ability to sit on the cliff watching the ocean. Now some may say, but I love surfing the waves. Okay. There's no rule that you have to get out of the ocean. The only rule is that if you are hooked into the waves going up, you're going to be hooked into the waves going down. And unless you're a surfer and you love coming down, this is where the teaching is about getting out of the ocean. And getting out of it how? It's not about away from life. It's getting out of it simply with my awareness. When we speak about practices of mindfulness, of consciousness, of cultivating pure awareness, it's not about being away from the world, but it's about no longer being hooked into a particular wave that is going up and down, and rather simply infusing the entire ocean with my awareness. So yeah, I may be aware that there's a little wave over there, and maybe aware that there's a wave over here. And maybe aware that there's a coral reef over there. But I'm not identified with it. I'm not going up or down. My awareness just permeates it all. In terms of not being the doer, that isn't usually so much connected to this emotional state as it has to do with issues of ego and issues of karma. So the teaching of realizing you're not the doer is spoken about very beautifully by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita when Arjuna is talking about how can he engage in this battle? He's just going to accrue such bad karma. He's doing such a bad thing, even though it's for a good reason. He's killing people. It's violence. Bad also against family members. And that he's just going to leave it all and go meditate in a cave. And Bhagavan Krishna says, not so fast. By running away to the cave, you're still accruing karma. not fulfilling your duties is just as much an action as fulfilling them. And every action, every karma accrues karmic fruit. So of course Arjun says, well, so then what to do? If everything I do is going to give me a karmic result, and if I have to keep coming back life after life to empty this karmic bank account, the plus and the minus, the negative and the positive, the sweet and the bitter, how do I break free? And this is where Lord Krishna says, by recognizing you are not the doer. Surrender unto me, surrender everything unto me. As long as you are identified with the doer, whether you are the philanthropist feeding the hungry, or you are the robber stealing from someone, in either case, as long as you're identified with the doer, you're accruing karma. And so even you may be doing great work, accruing sweet karmic fruit, accruing plus points in this cosmic karmic bank account. But nonetheless, you have to come back to enjoy them. And if your goal is not to come back, if your goal is to break this cycle of birth and death, that's when the answer is recognize you're not the doer. Recognize I, God, Krishna, I'm the doer. Surrender everything unto me, just become an instrument in my hands. Now it is not, by the way, an excuse to do wrong things and just say I'm not the doer. It's not about an intellectual justification of Krishna made me do it. It's about a deep spiritual awareness that I'm just a tool in God's hands, an instrument. And oh Lord, use me. Use me as an instrument. And so in the case of the Bhagavad Gita, in the case of the war of the Mahabharata, standing on the battleground in Kurukshetra, the divine plan was to restore Dharma, to restore righteousness, to restore goodness to the people of that land. This war was just a medium to make that happen. Arjun, therefore, was just an instrument in the hands of the divine to bring back Dharma. And if he could just surrender that, and instead of thinking, I am the doer, I am the wielder of the bow, the shooter of the arrow, but just recognize I'm just an instrument in Lord Krishna's hands. Krishna's my charioteer. He's driving my chariot, running my show. That's how we become free. And that's the context in which recognize you're not the doer tends to come up.
Is it the mind who experiences the joy?
Is it the mind that experiences joy? Mostly, yes. Now it depends again here what we mean when we say mind. If we mean brain, yes, all joy is experienced in our brain. Even if it's a joy, something as simple as somebody takes your arm and, very nicely does this and it feels really nicely. Nonetheless, your enjoyment of that little thing on your arm is being processed in your brain. Your enjoyment of the chocolate ice cream, processed in your brain. Your enjoyment of getting the raise. Your enjoyment of being first in your class. Your enjoyment of achieving something, accomplishing something. Your enjoyment of someone you love accomplishing, achieving something. Your joy of everything. It's processed in the brain. We know neurologically kind of where in the brain, how in the brain, how to stimulate it. This is where chemically, when people take drugs and they experience a high, but then when the chemicals wear off, they come down, they're low again. Well, temporarily, how is it possible that a little chemical can make you joyful? Well, because it simply temporarily changed the nature of the chemicals in the brain. Changed the nature of the electrical behavior of the brain. So yes, all of the emotions are processed in the brain. But that doesn't mean that true joy, that deep bliss, that experience of love is of the mind. And this is very subtle, but it's very important. The physical brain is simply a medium through which we are able to experience. And whatever we're experiencing, it's being processed in the brain, which is why when people are brain dead, we don't believe that they can experience joy or pain if they're brain dead. All of that which we experience is processed there. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that the experience takes place there. It doesn't mean that it's only about the brain or the mind. We are also energetic beings. We're physical beings, physical brain, physical chemicals, physical electricity, physical waves of the brain. But we're also energetic beings that literally are vibrating with energy. We are also awareness, consciousness, divinity that far transcends the physical body, the physical brain. So we experience joy and everything else on a lot of levels. The most basic level is the level of the brain. Yes, it's being processed in the brain with the chemicals, with the electricity. But when that joy is a joy that isn't about a particular stimulus, so it's not, oh, I ate this and now it made me feel really happy. Or you did this to me temporarily and while you were doing it, it felt really good and the pleasure signals of my brain went off. But a joy that arises in a state of experiencing the truth of who you are, of experiencing oneness with God. It's still on a physical level, yes, processed in the brain. But don't let that make you think that it's the brain having the experience. We are ultimately spiritual beings who have been given a physical body, an exquisitely beautiful, wonderful physical body to help us along our spiritual journey. But that joy, the spiritual joy, is of the spirit. It's of two becoming one energetically. It's of that which was separate, or separate thinking that which thought it was separate, never really was separate, but thought it was separate. Coming back to the awareness that it is one. That's the joy for which we have taken birth. And yeah, sure, the brain still may send off signals and have chemical reactions. But that is a joy that is being experienced in the soul, in the spirit. Because that's what it's taken human birth for, to have that experience. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. Beautiful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you back on Thursday for Satsang again. Have a beautiful, beautiful 2 days. So much love to you all.